The charity evening had started like any other lighthearted event. People filled the concert hall with warm conversations, friendly laughter, and the relaxed energy that comes from knowing the night was meant more for joy than formality. It wasn't a grand concert, and the pianist invited to perform was known not only for his talent but also for his playful style. He liked making the audience feel involved, breaking the invisible wall between the performer and the crowd. People enjoyed that about him, and that night was no different. As he walked onto the stage, he cracked a few jokes, asking the audience where they had come from and teasing some people sitting in the front. The room responded with cheerful laughter. It was the kind of moment that made everyone feel included, as if they were all part of a friendly gathering rather than a performance. While scanning the audience for his next light joke, his eyes settled on a woman seated quietly in the second row. She sat with her hands gently folded in her lap, her posture calm but not stiff. There was something soft in the way she looked at the piano on stage, almost like she recognized it, almost like she knew it well. But she wasn't drawing attention to herself. In fact, she seemed like someone who preferred to blend in. The pianist pointed at her with a grin and said, "How about you? Would you like to give it a try?" The audience chuckled immediately. It was obvious to everyone that he was joking. Most people would laugh and shake their head, maybe blush a little, and wave the suggestion away. But not this woman. To the surprise of almost everyone, she stood up. The room let out a soft ripple of murmurs. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but more like a shared moment of surprise spreading from seat to seat. Even the pianist, who had expected a shy refusal, blinked in mild confusion. His playful smile stayed on his face, but it softened a little, as if he suddenly wasn't entirely sure what kind of moment he had invited. She walked toward the stage in a steady, quiet manner. Not nervous, not overly confident, just calm. Her steps were unhurried, and her eyes remained on the piano as though she had already decided something the moment she stood. The audience became unusually still, watching her with curiosity. She didn't look like someone seeking attention. She didn't seem like someone trying to prove anything. Instead, she carried a gentle seriousness in her expression, the kind that made people instinctively hold their breath. When she reached the piano, the pianist stepped aside politely, unsure whether to keep the joking atmosphere going or to step back and let her have the moment. He gave her space. The woman nodded slightly as a quiet thank you and then turned her full attention to the instrument. She placed her hand on the polished wooden edge of the piano as if greeting an old friend after a long time. For a moment, just a moment, something in her posture changed. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing deepened. It was so subtle that only someone paying very close attention would notice, but it was enough to signal an emotional shift. There was no microphone announcement, no dramatic pause, no build-up, just the soft sound of her fingers being lightly placed on the keys. The joke was gone now. Everyone sensed it. The pianist stepped back a little more, watching quietly. His earlier playful expression faded into a thoughtful one. He didn't know what she was going to do, but something about her stillness told him this wouldn't be a clumsy attempt at a few random notes. The audience leaned in as well, their eyes fixed on her hands. Even people in the back rows seemed to sense the importance of the moment. She took a small breath. Then she played. The first note rang out with surprising clarity. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it carried an emotional weight that made the room fall completely silent. It was like the air changed around them. The soft tone drifted through the hall, connecting every listener in a single quiet thread of attention. As she continued, her touch on the piano was steady and sure. Each note flowed into the next with a natural rhythm that came not from rehearsal, but from understanding. It was the kind of playing that came from someone who felt music, not just performed it. The melody she created was gentle, almost like a whisper, yet powerful in the way it reached people without pushing. The audience didn't move. Even those who had been smiling moments earlier now stared at her with wide, focused eyes. Some leaned forward slightly, as if afraid they might miss even a single note. People who had been chatting softly before the performance now sat completely still, even the pianist, who had started the moment with a playful intention. found himself standing quietly to the side, his expression slowly shifting from amusement to admiration. He had expected a few hesitant notes, the kind most people might play when put on the spot. But this woman wasn't guessing her way around the keyboard. She wasn't fumbling. She wasn't pretending. She knew exactly what she was doing. Her hands glided over the keys with a calm grace. Not rushing, not hesitating. It almost looked like she had played this melody 1,000 times. Not because she had practiced, but because she had lived through the emotions behind it. There was something deeply honest in the music, something that didn't need any words to explain itself. The melody grew slightly stronger. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it carried a deeper feeling. Her playing painted a quiet picture, one that listeners felt rather than saw. Some imagined memories of their own lives in the notes. Some thought of things they had forgotten. Others simply closed their eyes because it was easier to feel the music that way. The woman herself didn't seem to be performing for the audience at all. She wasn't looking for applause or recognition. She wasn't showing off. It looked as though she was simply letting a part of herself speak, one that had been quiet for too long. There was a moment when the pianist's eyes softened. Something in the melody touched him in a way he hadn't expected. He hadn't planned this moment. He hadn't rehearsed it. And he hadn't imagined that a light joke would lead to something so heartfelt. But there he was, standing speechless as her music filled the hall with a gentle emotional depth. People in the audience exchanged glances, not because they found the situation funny, but because they were trying to understand how such a powerful performance came from someone they had not expected. Many of them had assumed she was an ordinary guest, someone enjoying the event like everyone else. But now they wondered what kind of story she carried within her, what kind of past led her to play like that. The melody shifted again, this time softening, almost like a gentle sigh. Her hands relaxed further, and the room seemed to breathe with the music. A sense of calm washed over the audience, the kind that makes a person forget everything else for a moment: worries, noise, stress, even time. It was all replaced by a peaceful simplicity. As she continued, her face reflected a quiet emotion, not sadness, not joy, but something deeper and more personal. People didn't know what it was, but they felt it clearly. They felt a connection forming, one note at a time. When the passage of the melody reached a delicate turn, even the smallest rustle in the audience faded. It was as though everyone collectively agreed to hold themselves still, not wanting to break the magic that was unfolding in front of them. The performance didn't feel long, yet it felt complete. And by the time she reached the last soft phrase, the hall was silent enough to hear a breath. She pressed the final note. It lingered in the air, warm and gentle, fading slowly into the stillness of the room. And then, nothing, no immediate applause, no quick reaction, just a silence filled with emotion, silent but full. It was a moment where everyone was trying to absorb what they had just heard, trying to understand how something that began as a simple joke had turned into an experience none of them expected. The woman slowly lifted her hands from the keyboard. She didn't bow. She didn't look for approval. She simply stepped back from the piano with a quiet ease, as if the music had never been about impressing anyone. It had been about expression, honesty, and perhaps releasing something she had carried quietly inside her. The pianist took a small step forward, his expression soft and changed. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said enough: respect, surprise, and something close to gratitude. The audience remained silent, but not because they didn't want to react. They were touched. They needed a moment to return from wherever the music had taken them. Many eyes in the hall glistened softly, and even those who didn't fully understand why they felt emotional knew something meaningful had happened. What had started as a simple, playful invitation had turned into a moment none of them would forget. And though the night had begun with laughter and casual jokes, it now held a softness that left everyone waiting quietly for what might come next. The moment after the woman finished playing felt strangely unreal. The hall remained filled with silence, not the uncomfortable kind, but the sort of silence that happens only when people are deeply moved and don't know how to return to normal right away. It was as if the last note she played was still floating in the air, refusing to leave. Some listeners sat with their hands gently covering their mouths. Others stared at the piano with wide eyes, and a few simply looked down, trying to understand the emotions that had unexpectedly risen inside them. The pianist, who had invited her up in a playful mood, stood completely still. He had made hundreds of jokes like this in previous events, usually getting laughter and maybe a few awkward attempts at music. But this time, something different had happened. He had not expected to witness a moment that would stay with him for a very long time. He looked at the woman with a soft expression, trying to find the right words, but none came. It wasn't the right time for words anyway. The woman stepped back from the piano, with the same calmness she had carried when she walked to it. She didn't seem aware of how deeply her music had touched the room. Oh, perhaps she did know, but she didn't make a big deal out of it. She simply stood there quietly, letting the energy of the moment settle on its own. The audience began to stir slightly, shifting in their seats. Not loudly, not all at once, just small movements, like they were slowly coming back from an emotional place they didn't expect to visit that night. And then, very softly at first, a few people stood. Others followed. Soon almost everyone was on their feet, not cheering or shouting, but offering a quiet standing ovation filled with respect rather than excitement. The woman looked surprised for a second. Not because she didn't believe she had played well, but because she hadn't expected any reaction at all. She hadn't come to the event for attention. She hadn't come to impress anyone. She had simply answered a playful invitation without thinking too much about it. Her eyes softened slightly and she gave a small, almost shy smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they are grateful but don't quite know how to receive so much appreciation at once. The pianist stepped toward her slowly, still unsure how to address what had just happened. He didn't want to turn the moment into another joke. He felt it would be disrespectful. Instead, he offered a gentle nod. One professional musician gives another when they recognize something genuine. It wasn't the kind of nod that came from skill alone, but from understanding the emotion behind the performance. There was something in the woman's expression, something quiet and personal that made him wonder about her past. Had she once been a musician? Had she stepped away from music for some reason? Had the piano once been a part of her everyday life? He didn't know the answers, and she didn't show any interest in explaining. The moment had already spoken for itself. When the applause finally faded into soft murmurs, the pianist turned back to the audience. He cleared his throat gently, still a little shaken by the unexpected turn of the evening. He thanked the woman with sincerity and invited her to return to her seat. The audience watched her walk back down the stage steps, and many people smiled at her as she passed. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that showed they truly appreciated what she had shared with them. As she sat down, a few people leaned toward each other, whispering about how beautiful the performance had been. Some wondered aloud how someone could play with such emotion while looking so calm. Others quietly wiped their eyes, embarrassed to be seen crying at an event that was supposed to be cheerful and relaxed. But no one judged. It was simply a moment where music connected people, even those who didn't know each other. The pianist returned to the piano to continue the event, but something had changed. The room's earlier playful energy had softened into something more thoughtful. He played his next piece with more care than usual, perhaps inspired by what he had just witnessed. The audience listened with a deeper level of attention, still holding on to the emotional afterglow created by the woman's unexpected performance. As the evening went on, people kept glancing at the second-row seat where the woman sat. She didn't speak much. She didn't try to draw attention, but she carried herself with a peaceful grace that gave the impression of someone who had learned to keep their emotions in quiet places. When the event finally ended and people began to leave their seats, several audience members approached her, not to overwhelm her, not to interrogate her, but simply to express their appreciation. A few people gently said how moved they were by her playing. Others told her they were grateful for the experience. Someone even mentioned that her melody reminded them of a memory from years ago they had almost forgotten. The woman listened with warm eyes and nodded softly each time, offering small, kind smiles in return. The pianist approached her last. He waited until most people had stepped away, not wanting to rush into her personal space. When he walked up to her, his expression was humble. He apologized if his joke had put her in an awkward position, but she shook her head gently before he could finish. Her gesture made it clear she felt no discomfort or annoyance. If anything, she seemed grateful for the unexpected moment. He told her that her playing was remarkable, not just technically, but emotionally. He said he hadn't expected such depth from someone who claimed no place on stage that night. She responded quietly, saying she once played often, but life had led her in different directions. She didn't go into the details, and he didn't ask. Some stories are better left unspoken, especially when the music has already shared the emotional truth behind them. They stood there for a moment longer, sharing a comfortable silence. It was a silence that said more than any conversation could. Finally, the pianist thanked her again, not out of politeness but from genuine appreciation. She returned the thanks softly, then gathered her belongings and walked toward the exit with the same calm steps she had taken toward the stage earlier. Outside the hall, the night air was cool and gentle. Small groups of people lingered near the entrance, still discussing the event. Some of them mentioned the woman's performance again, describing it as the highlight of the evening. She heard a few of the comments, but she didn't slow down or react. She simply kept walking, her expression thoughtful, almost peaceful. As she walked down the quiet street, she lightly touched her fingertips together, the same fingertips that had moments earlier filled a concert hall with emotion. She didn't smile widely or show any dramatic reaction, but there was a small, soft expression on her face that hinted she had allowed a part of herself to return that night. A part she had kept silent for a long time. Back inside the hall, the pianist remained for a while after most people had left. He sat at the empty piano and played a few soft notes, almost testing the keys. The sound echoed gently in the now quiet room. He thought about the woman's music, about how her simple act had changed the entire atmosphere of the evening. And he realized something important. Sometimes, the most unforgettable moments come from people who never planned to stand in the spotlight. The event would be remembered, not for its jokes or lighthearted activities, but for a moment that was never meant to happen, a moment that arrived quietly, honestly, and unexpectedly. People would go home that night with a story they would tell their families, friends, and perhaps even strangers in the future, the story of how a playful invitation turned into a performance that touched an entire room. And though the woman had walked away without seeking recognition, the memory of her music stayed behind, filling the hall with a gentle presence long after she left. Some people believed she would return to music. Others thought she might choose to let that moment stand alone. But whether she returned or not, one thing was certain. For everyone who witnessed it, the evening became something special, something rare, something that reminded them of the quiet power one person can carry without even trying to be noticed. The music didn't need a name, a title, or a story explained. It spoke for itself. And in the hearts of those who heard it, it continued to echo softly, beautifully, and with the kind of emotion that doesn't fade quickly.